My girlfriend rejected my proposal in front of all my friends, but when I found out why she was seeing someone else, I kicked her out, and they never saw my revenge coming. I'm 30 years old. I work in software development, and I need to tell this story because what happened 6 months ago basically destroyed what I thought was going to be my future. My whole planned life, with the person I believed was the love of my life. I guess I should start from the beginning. When I met Madison like 4.5 years ago at a tech conference in the city. I don't remember exactly what attracted me to her at first, to be honest. But I do remember that we talked for hours about everything and nothing, you know? Those conversations that flow effortlessly, and when you realize it's already 3 in the morning and you don't want it to end. She worked in digital marketing for a startup, and I had just gotten a position as a senior developer at a medium-sized company, and we saw each other constantly because our offices were relatively close. At first, we dated casually, like coffees after work and dinners on weekends, but after a few months we were officially boyfriend and girlfriend and things were going incredibly well, or so I thought. Madison moved into my apartment after like a year and a half of dating, and honestly, the living together was pretty good at first. We had our occasional fights, of course, like all couples, but nothing serious, nothing that made me think things were bad. She was fun, smart, ambitious, and I really thought we had found something special together. My sister Emily met her several times and was always polite to her, although looking back, I should have noticed that Emily never quite got as enthusiastic about Madison as I expected. There were a couple of occasions when Emily said things to me like, "Are you sure Madison is as committed to this as you are?" But I took it as older sister overprotectiveness. You know, nothing out of the ordinary. Christopher and Matthew, my best friends since college, also met her and seemed to get along well with her, although Christopher once commented something about Madison seeming a bit distant sometimes. But again, I ignored those signs because I was in love and happy. After 3.5 years together, I started thinking seriously about marriage. I mean, we already lived together. Our lives were completely intertwined. We shared expenses and responsibilities. We talked about the future all the time, or at least I talked, and she nodded and smiled. There was never an explicit conversation like, "Hey Madison, do you want to marry me someday?" But we had talked about kids, about buying a bigger house, about all those things that couples talk about when they assume they're heading toward marriage. So, after 4 years together, I decided it was the perfect time to take the next step. I talked to Christopher and Matthew about my plans, and they helped me organize everything. Like they were super enthusiastic and completely supported me in the idea of doing something special and memorable. I planned everything for like 2 months. I booked a weekend at a beautiful resort about 3 hours from the city, one of those places with a lake view and private cabins that Madison had always said she wanted to visit. I invited Christopher and Matthew with their partners, and also Samantha and Brianna, who were Madison's best friends. So it would be an intimate celebration but surrounded by the most important people to us. I bought the ring like a month before, spent close to $8,000 on a diamond ring that I thought she was going to love because Madison had mentioned several times that she liked princess cuts. Honestly, I was nervous but also excited, like that mix of anxiety and happiness you feel when you're about to do something that's going to change your life forever. The weekend arrived and everything seemed to be going perfect. Madison was in a good mood during the trip, laughing and taking pictures of the landscape from the car window. We arrived at the resort on Friday afternoon and spent the rest of the day relaxing, swimming in the lake, drinking wine with the others. Saturday night was when I had planned the proposal. I organized a dinner on the resort terrace overlooking the lake, with hanging lights and candles everywhere. You know, all that romantic atmosphere you see in movies. Christopher and Matthew made sure everything was ready, while I took Madison for a walk on the dock just before dinner. And when we returned, everyone was there waiting for us on the lit terrace. I remember, my heart was beating so hard I thought Madison could hear it. We sat down to dinner, and after like an hour of conversation and laughter, I stood up. The plan was to give a short speech about how much Madison meant to me, and then get down on one knee with the ring, like classic but sincere. I started talking and I noticed Madison was looking at me with a strange expression. Not exactly surprise or excitement, but rather something between confusion and panic. But I was so caught up in the moment that I continued. I talked about how we met, about the last 4 years together, about how she had made my life better in every way, and then I took the ring out of my pocket and got down on one knee in front of her. Madison, will you marry me? I asked, with the most sincerity I've ever felt in my life. And then something happened that definitely wasn't in the plan. Madison froze completely, looking at me with wide eyes, and the silence that followed was probably the most awkward and endless of my life. I could feel everyone's eyes on us, especially Samantha and Brianna, who seemed as surprised as I was by Madison's reaction. After what seemed like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, Madison finally spoke and said, Alexander, I can't. I need more time. This is too fast. And my brain just didn't process those words at first. Like I stayed there kneeling like an idiot trying to understand what had just happened. Too fast? We'd been together for 4 years. We'd been living together for over 2 years. How could it be too fast? I slowly got up, put the ring back in my pocket, and tried to keep my composure, even though inside I felt like I'd been hit in the stomach with a baseball bat. Christopher and Matthew exchanged uncomfortable looks, and Samantha and Brianna looked genuinely shocked. Madison quickly apologized and ran off to our cabin, and I stood there, not knowing what to do. Christopher came over and put a hand on my shoulder and said, Man, I'm so sorry. And I could only nod because I literally couldn't form words. Dinner obviously ended right there. Everyone started dispersing in silence with uncomfortable expressions, and I walked to the cabin where Madison was locked in the bathroom, crying. I spent the rest of that night trying to talk to her through the bathroom door, asking her what had happened, why she had said no, if there was something wrong in our relationship that I wasn't seeing. Madison eventually came out and just said she wasn't ready, that she needed more time to be sure. That marriage was a huge step, and she didn't want to rush. And I wanted to believe her. Honestly, I wanted to think it had just been a misunderstanding or a last-minute panic attack, but something inside me already knew there was something else. Something she wasn't telling me. We slept in the same bed that night, but we might as well have been on different planets. Like the space between us felt immense and unbridgeable. Sunday morning, we packed our things in silence and left the resort without even saying goodbye properly to the others, because everything was too awkward. The drive home was the longest and most tense 3 hours of my life. Madison was looking out the window without saying anything, and I was driving with my hands tight on the steering wheel, trying to process what had happened and what it meant for us. When we got to the apartment, Madison said she needed space and went to stay with Samantha for a few days, and I was left alone in the apartment surrounded by all our stuff and feeling completely lost. I called Emily that same night and told her everything. Emily, always the protective one, was furious. Alexander, I told you something. Didn't add up with Madison? She said. With that I told you so voice that I hate so much, but that I needed to hear in that moment. She asked me if I had noticed anything weird in Madison's behavior before the proposal, and honestly, looking back, there were signs. Madison had been more distant in recent months. She was coming home late from work more often. She was glued to her phone all the time and would put it face down when I entered the room. She'd get annoyed by little things that didn't used to bother her. Emily told me something that froze my blood. Look, I don't want to be that person. But have you considered that maybe Madison is keeping her options open? Or worse, maybe she's seeing someone else? At first, I completely rejected that idea because I didn't even want to consider that possibility. Madison wouldn't do that, I told Emily. We've been together for 4 years. She lives with me. Why would she stay with me if she was interested in someone else? But Emily insisted that I pay attention, that I look more closely, and the seed of doubt was already planted in my head. The next few days were horrible. Madison returned to the apartment after 3 days with Samantha, but things between us were extremely tense. We tried to talk about what had happened, and she kept with the same story that she needed more time, that she loved me but wasn't ready for marriage. And I tried to be understanding, but inside, I was dying of frustration and confusion. Like a week after the failed proposal, Emily called me again. Alexander, I need to tell you something, she said with that serious tone that let me know I wasn't going to like what was coming. A friend of mine saw Madison having lunch with a guy at that Italian cafe downtown, you know, the one near her office. And it didn't look like a work meeting, like they were laughing. He touched her hand at one point. They looked very comfortable together. My heart sank. Are you sure it was Madison? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Emily confirmed that her friend was completely sure, and also that she had seen Madison with the same guy having coffee on another occasion a couple of weeks before. I confronted Madison that same night. I came home from work and she was in the living room watching TV like nothing was wrong. I sat in front of her and asked her directly, "Is there someone else?" Madison went pale and started with the typical, "What are you talking about?" But I wasn't in the mood for games. "You've been seen with someone, Madison, at the Italian cafe, having lunch and coffee, looking very comfortable together," I said, trying to stay calm, even though inside I was boiling. Madison started stuttering something about a coworker. She had lunch with a couple of times, but it was nothing. Just a friend, but her face said something completely different. I pressed her more. "Is that why you said no when I proposed? Because you're seeing someone else?" And Madison finally broke. She started crying and admitted she had been going out with a guy from her work, some guy named Derek who was a marketing manager at her company. "It's not what you think," she said through sobs. "We've only gone out a few times, nothing physical has happened. But yes, I've been confused about what I want, about us, about everything." And I felt like someone was ripping my heart out of my chest. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked in a voice I barely recognized as mine. Madison admitted she had started talking more with Derek like 4 months ago. That at first it was just friendship, but they had started seeing each other outside of work like 2 months ago. So, while I was planning our proposal, spending thousands of dollars on a ring, organizing a romantic weekend, she was exploring options with another guy. The betrayal I felt in that moment is hard to describe. It wasn't just anger. It was a mix of pain, humiliation, rage, and disappointment so deep I could barely breathe. "And why did you stay with me?" I asked her. "Why didn't you just break up with me if you were interested in someone else?" Madison said she didn't know what she wanted, that she loved me but also had feelings for Derek, that when I proposed she panicked because she knew she had to make a decision and wasn't ready. I told her to leave. I didn't yell or insult or make a scene. I simply told her as calmly as I could manage, "Madison, I want you to pack your things and leave my apartment. I'm not going to be your backup plan while you decide if you'd rather be with Derek or me." She tried to argue that we could talk about it, that we could go to couples therapy, that she could cut contact with Derek and work on our relationship, but I had already made my decision. Self-respect is something my father always taught me to maintain, and staying with someone who had emotionally cheated on me and humiliated me by rejecting my proposal publicly while secretly seeing another guy just wasn't an option. Madison packed her things that same night crying and trying to convince me to give her another chance, and I stayed firm, even though inside I felt destroyed. When she finally left and closed the door, I collapsed on the couch and cried for the first time in years. I wasn't just crying for the relationship that had just ended, but for the 4 years I felt I had wasted. For the future I had imagined that would now never exist. For the humiliation that all our friends had witnessed that rejection. For everything. The next few days were a blur of text messages from Madison asking me to reconsider, of calls from Christopher and Matthew asking how I was, of Emily coming to the apartment with food because she knew I wasn't eating properly. Christopher and Matthew were incredible. Honestly, they came to in the apartment like 3 days after the breakup with beer and pizza and just stayed with me, not pressuring me to talk if I didn't want to, just being there. Christopher told me something that stuck with me. "Man, I know it hurts now, but you made the right decision. You deserve someone who's completely sure they want to be with you, not someone who has you as an option while exploring other possibilities." I sold the engagement ring like 2 weeks later. I didn't want to have it stored in the apartment constantly reminding me of what had happened. I lost like $1,500 on the sale because you know how it is with jewelry, you lose value automatically once you buy it, but the money was the least of it in that moment. I used part of the money to change some things in the apartment, like I bought new furniture for the living room and painted a couple of rooms, basically trying to make the space feel less like the place where Madison and I had lived together and more like my own space. Madison tried to contact me for weeks, text messages saying she had made a mistake, that she had ended things with Derek, that she loved me and wanted to try again, but I had already closed that door. I responded to her only once saying I wished her the best, but that we were over for good, and that I needed her to respect my decision and stop contacting me. Eventually, the messages stopped, and honestly, it was a relief. Something surprising that happened was that Zoe, Madison's younger sister, called me like a month after all this. "Alexander, I know you probably don't want to talk to anyone related to Madison, but I wanted to tell you I'm so sorry about what happened," she told me. I had always liked Zoe during the relationship, and that she took the time to call me meant a lot. She told me she had talked to Madison and had told her she was an idiot for what she did, that I had been an amazing boyfriend, and that she had ruined an excellent relationship because of confusion and selfishness. Zoe told me I made the right decision ending the relationship, that Madison needed to learn from her mistakes, and that I deserved someone better. Now, 6 months later, I'm in a much better place. I'm not going to lie and say it was easy, or that there weren't nights when I missed having someone next to me. But I've been working on myself, going to the gym more often, reconnecting with friends I had neglected a bit during the relationship, and basically rebuilding my life the way I want it to be. Emily constantly tells me how proud she is of how I handled everything, and Christopher and Matthew have introduced me to some of their friends, although I still don't feel completely ready to start dating someone new. Like 2 weeks ago, I ran into Madison at a Starbucks downtown. It was awkward but not devastating like I thought it would be. She was alone, ordering coffee, and when she saw me, she came over to say hi. We talked for literally 2 minutes, like superficial, conversation about work and nothing else, and then we each went our separate ways. And I realized in that moment that I had really turned the page, that I no longer felt that sharp pain in my chest when I saw her, just a kind of calm indifference. I guess that's healing, right? When you can see the person who broke your heart and just not feel anything intense, neither love nor hate, just indifference. I still think sometimes about how things would have been if Madison had said yes when I proposed. Would we have ended up getting married only to divorce a year later, when her affair with Derek inevitably would have come to light? Did she save me years of an unhappy marriage by rejecting the proposal? I don't know, and I guess I'll never know. What I do know is that I deserve to be with someone who's completely sure they want to be with me, someone who doesn't keep me as an option while exploring other possibilities. And someday, when I meet that person, I'm going to propose marriage. Again. But this time, I hope the answer will be different.